India published some key economic data today, including the GDP numbers. They reflect the growing consensus about the Indian economy. Better than the world, yet facing challenges. That is the consensus. We'll start with the data. India's GDP grew by 13.5% in the first quarter of this financial year. That's April, May and June, the first quarter. In these 3 months, India's GDP grew 13.5%. That's the fastest since 2021. Now, this data is year on year. What does that mean? It means that it compares the same time period from 2 different years. For example, the first quarter of 2022 and the first quarter of 2021. In other words, India's economy grew 13.5% compared to the first quarter of the last financial year. That's how this calculation is done. Now for the big question, is 13.5 good enough? Well, double digit is always good for GDP numbers. It is the dream of any developing economy. Also compare it to the rest of the world. China's economy grew by just 0.4%. The US economy shrank by 1.6%. So 13.5 is certainly very good performance. 2 factors must be considered here. Number one, what we call the base effect. You see, GDP growth depends on where you start. Every country measures its growth based on the previous year. So in this case, it's 2021. And 2021 was a horrible year for the whole world, including India. We saw lockdowns, we saw the dreaded second wave in India. All of it took a toll on India's economic activity. So the base point was really very low. And that explains the higher growth rate. Factor number 2 is the market expectation. The State Bank of India was projecting 15.7% growth. The Reserve Bank of India was expecting 16.2%. Both those projections were not met. What does that mean? It means the rebound is on, but there was scope for more. Perhaps global factors weighed India down. Remember, the first quarter also coincided with Russia's offensive in Ukraine. Energy prices were high, supply chains were disrupted. Those factors must also be considered while analyzing these numbers. Overall, it's an impressive first quarter, much better than other major economies. But this is no time to celebrate, because the coming months are crucial for the Indian economy. Chances are there will be a slowdown. I say this because of multiple factors. The war in Ukraine is still dragging on. Global inflation is still rising. The dollar keeps getting stronger and interest rates are being hiked consistently. Those headwinds could slow India down. In the current quarter, GDP growth is estimated at 6.2%. In the next quarter, 4.5%. That indicates a rapid slowdown in India. A lot depends on what the RBI does. The central bank is prioritizing inflation over growth. So chances are there will be more rate hikes, perhaps a 50 basis point hike and then a 25 basis point hike. And if that happens, India's economy will be hit like all others. Let me tell you why. Consumer spending makes up 55% of India's economic activity, more than half. And spending depends on the availability of cheap credit, the availability of money. People make big purchases with loans. If loans are too expensive, those purchases may not happen. In fact, I have some numbers for you. In 2021, the State Bank of India was lending at 6.7%. We're talking about home loans here, 6.7%. Now the lending rate is 8.05%, which means borrowers will have to pay more for the same loans. In the first quarter, that was not the case. Consumer spending was still relatively high. Take two-wheeler sales, for example. It's considered a good indicator of economic health. From April to June, India sold 5.03 billion units of two-wheelers. That's higher than both 2020 and 2021. At the same time, it was 20% lower than 2019. So we are still far off from that pre-pandemic situation. Like I said, it's a sensitive period for India. It is outperforming all major economies. It is withstanding political pressures, even sidestepping rising energy costs. The question is, how much longer can this be sustained? The latest data clearly shows that India is a bright spot, but there are too many dark clouds hovering around. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.